And we're back for another episode of Alfacast. It's great to be back after a couple-week hiatus, much needed rest and recuperation as we come into winter time. I'm here with Dr. Bear Paul Lando, and we're going to jump into an exciting episode today about, and yeah, this may not sound exciting at first, but trust me, hang with us here, about minerals and the new paradigm shift that this relates to. How are you this wonderful morning, Dr. Lando?
Hey, doing good, Mike. Good to be back in the North Country and be fun to get back in the swing of things here. Had a good trip and I can tell you all about it or whatever we want to talk about. And just to echo what you were saying, we'll be having a presentation on minerals. I took a few notes on a PowerPoint just to maybe keep us on target a little bit, but we don't have to stay on target. So whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah, we're not always the best at staying on target because like anything in life, it's fractal in nature in terms of how our thoughts work, and we love going off on tangents. I feel like that's the fun meat of the show anyways, are the tangents we go down. So we'll see where this goes, but let's just jump right into it. It's kind of funny. I did a couple live streams while you were down in La La Land, taking care of biz and hanging out with fam and our other partners for Alfa Vedic. And, it's always, I'm sure, quite interesting to go down to Venice Beach, living up here. And feel free to let us know in your thoughts with that. But I did a couple live streams on D Live here just for the crew and for the fam. The AV family that we're really starting to develop here. And if you're listening to this on iTunes or your favorite podcasting platform, we do this as a live stream on a platform we really like called D Live. And it's something that we're really embracing as an alternative to the bigger technocrats like YouTube and Google and Facebook. We're not really doing the live stream to Twitter or Facebook or any of that because we really want to embrace this platform. So you can find us on dlive.tv/Alfa Vedic. And we've got a chat going on right now as we speak. We've got a great community that's developing here on DLive, as well as our Telegram, which is t.me/Alfa Vedic, and that's ALFAVEDIC. So that's my spiel on that. Please join us. It's every Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. That being said, when I was doing the live stream last week, Bear, I had someone who I don't recall talking to before come out of the blue and ask me about what's up with your 0-point liquids, these minerals, and waveform mechanics. And I was like, oh, wow, not the best person to answer this. I wish Dr. Lando was here because he's kind of more of the specialist in terms of this stuff. But, fast forward a week and now you're out of the blue bringing this up. So I'm not sure if you saw that on the live stream when you reviewed it or whatnot, but great timing here because this will all play into minerals, I assume, correct?
Stellar timing. And we're not just going to do a generic mineral talk. Dead doctors don't lie and minerals are good for you, all good stuff, but we should be well beyond that now. And what we like to do here is use every possible topic to illustrate how the universe really works and our place in it. And we really have to outgrow all the stuff we learned in high school chemistry. So that's where we're going today. And it also fits in with a lot of the other topics we talk about with, just spirituality and metaphysics. And, that's really relegated to pure science now. And the information is out to explain that, so that our analytical brains aren't in conflict all the time and trying to talk us out of what's really been in front of our nose all the time. And when you really understand what the elements or minerals are, not only will you get better ideas as far as what you should be taking for your health, but you'll understand how they really work. And then for those of us in the manufacturing business, we can actually make smart products rather than just trying to, gather the basic elements in one single form. So we'll talk all about that. If you hear any strange noises here, I'm not suffering from gastric upset. I have my partner here in my lap, and she yells at me periodically if I stop scratching her. She's she's a woman. She's very demanding. What can I say?
Anyway,
for those listening,
I'll follow
your lead, Mike.
Well, I was just gonna say for those listening, that's Bear just held up a little Pika. What do you call that? This little doggy there, who kind of looks like the little guy out of Jabba the Hutt's friend from Return of the Jedi. Now that's not a diss. She's a lot prettier than that little guy, but about the same size. I don't know if you remember that little character who kind of cackles sitting next to Jabba the Hutt. She's much prettier, but she can be a little feisty.
I'm watching one of my favorite shows. One of my favorite all-time books is I like science fiction, fantasy, and the Golden Compass series. But anyway, the HBO did a really good job on that, so I'm watching that right now. So if anybody's familiar with that, all humans have what they call their daemon. It's spelled daemon, actually pronounced demon, but I like daemon better. And so everybody has their little animal familiar that's actually represents their essence at the soul level, and it's a great story anyway. So I have my daemon with me, and I guess my I have Chihuahua essence. Some people have wolves, some people have lions, and so forth. So anyway, I'm off on a tangent already. Let's go here.
No worries. Yeah, as Hope says, Pikachu.
Oh, okay. There she goes. She got bored.
She's over it. Okay, she's knows all about minerals already. So how do you want to start? Or he's going off to handle her real quick. So yeah, we're gonna dive into minerals, and feel free to screen share the charts here, Bear.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just throw them up periodically and tell me if it's working here. Let's go. Bear with me. Let's go.
We'll bear with you, no pun intended.
Full screen. And oh, you know what? I should have done something else first. Hang on.
That's okay.
I should have done share first, shouldn't I have? Okay, so share. Let's do this. And
there we go.
How are we doing?
There we go. Not bad for a boomer.
Okay. I can learn.
Hope just said she got her new C60 in the mail. That's great. Yeah, I'm loving the new C60. It's got a different flavor profile, and I like the dropper that comes with it now. But I did notice it's got a different flavor, Bear, in terms of our new C60.
And that's a whole different talk. But we'll mention carbon 60 at the very end, maybe, because it does have to do with minerals, since carbon's a mineral and like the backbone of our reality here. So, okay, let's go minerals, nature's keyboard. So, Michael, why do you suppose we might call minerals nature's keyboard?
Because they are the inorganic elements that connect the language, if you will, that creates reality. I don't know. Having some
good stab.
Yeah.
Good effort. Okay, how the hell do I get back out of share now?
That's okay. You can keep this going, whatever.
Okay. So nature's keyboard, minerals aren't physical substances. Well, let's go right into the first slide. That might help explain. And then, Mike or anybody out there, a lot of these might sound a little esoteric at first glance, but I just came off the top of my head and, put some things down. But let's talk about each one of them, or none of them, whatever you want to do. So the elemental matrix, we really do live in a matrix, and it is a matrix of electrical forces. Those forces, we have a lot to do with how those forces come into being. And, we live in a computer age for good reason, and that is because we're supposed to be learning from our computer technology the nature of our reality, because, as we like to say all the time, you cannot bring out something in a technological form unless that concept or model already exists in nature. So computers are supposed to be teaching us that there is nothing but pure energy. That energy is like the clay that we use to model our reality, literally, with our thoughts and our emotions. And then the building blocks that are made from those those elements we call minerals. And that's what we learned in high school chemistry. That's what we, memorized the periodic table for. And supposedly these little elements all get glued together somehow and create our physical universe. But it's really kind of a dumb concept. And the physical universe made out of atomic matter, that's constructed with little physical magic BBs, or even in the folks that think they're on the leading edge these days, and they talk about quantum physics and everything. Well, quantum's still a unit. It's still kind of a bunch of BS. We have to get beyond all the confines of physicality. So the electrical model of elemental creation, what we're really dealing with is tonal fields, and we can explain in great detail how these tonal fields create the unique characteristics that then we associate with all of the different elements that we learned in basic chemistry. But what they don't tell you is there's a lot of stuff in between those elements that we could use even more usefully, including in nutritional supplementation. And also it would allow us to understand our true role in the created universe, and how we do not have to be a victim of our own creations. And so let's read down this first page here. Just see, I forget what I just did this last night. Okay, so point number one, the particle theory of elements confines humanity to a false paradigm of materialistic limitation. One of my favorite quotes is Deepak Chopra, who calls it the superstition of materialism, and it really is. Point number two, elements are differentiated by waveform pressure zones to function as the universal keyboard of creation. So keyboard, we're really talking about creating different tonal fields. And if you consider that each element is a vibratory level or a frequency, no different than a musical note. In fact, that's exactly what it is. Well, if you understand that's how it works, and then if you, with a trained consciousness, will say, can go in and create different tonal fields with your intentions and with your focused thought, then we're going to be much more adept at creating what we do want, rather than creating or continuing the chaos that we can't figure out why the hell, we can't have a happy day happen. So the next one, elements are derived from pure prana. That's just a term, of course, from an Asian culture. You can call it whatever you want, but that is the universal palette, like an artist palette. And it does provide all the frequency, all the elements that we can put into motion and create a real three-dimensional experience that our senses report back to us as physical, but which of course isn't, because our senses are part of the same fabrication. So nice try in the scientific community, where they're trying to construct double-blind studies and take themselves out of the equation for a measure of objectivity and empirical evidence, because that just shows that you're stupid right out of the blocks. Okay, so next one, the conscious and focused use of these elemental forces will set mankind free from the external controls and dependencies. Of course, the only thing we're dependent on or controlled by is or the only way that those things can happen is if we think that we're victimized by a physical universe, which doesn't happen in the first place. Not to mention that we created the whole shebang in the first place. Couple more, and then I'll shut this down. We can talk. The science of nature spiraling mechanics will facilitate departure from energy consumption to initiate the age of transmutation. So energy consumption, we're not going Green New Deal on you here, but what we are saying is that we have the bright idea that we have to consume our environment, whether it's consuming it by mining minerals out of the ground or oil, in order to create our energy needs, or when it comes to food, thinking that we have to consume our own external reality in the form of plants and so forth, and run it through a digestive tract to create our energy. The age of transmutation is when the consciousness rises to the point of understanding how we put these forces into motion, and then we can literally create things without having to use up our own environment and consume it. So, and we're supposed to be in the age of transmutation now. That's where we're supposed to be. So let me go back.
Yeah.
Last one. Nutritional and medical sciences will then operate beyond the confines of aging and disease. Aging and disease can only happen, and I get it. I've got gray hair and everything, so don't anybody bust me out there. But I can tell you exactly how I got every single gray hair, and also, if we use our experience, even though we go through our own processes with maladies in our own body and go through a so-called aging process, it's good if we get to a point in our experience where we start connecting in the dots and say, oh, I get how that happened. And then you can start slowing down all those things you don't want, and future generations will actually not have to go there in the first place. So, Mike, while I try to figure out how to get out of this share screen here, go ahead, and any comments you might have.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of comments. First and foremost, Russ in the chat had a great comment here. He said, so minerals tune our bodies like you would tune an out-of-tune piano. I thought that was a pretty cool analogy.
Yeah.
And so the tonal fields, we could get into that a little bit. Someone who loves music, that really resonates with me. As far as unsharing, you just go up to meeting and hit stop share. Yeah.
Hang on.
Yeah. So I've been reading a lot of late the Hermetic philosophies, which is crazy because it goes back, some would say 20,000 years, 10,000, 11, 12, 6, whatever. It goes back thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. And now we're getting to the science thanks to Walter Russell and people like Wilhelm Reich, which we'll talk about today a bit, Royal Rife, these great people who actually applied this ancient wisdom, these principles, to actual science. And the principles it's crazy. They relate right to what you're saying, like the principle of vibration, that nothing is static. So that immediately deteriorates any of the current materialism, scientism notions of quantum. Even though they'll say that things are vibrating, they still get into this limitation of thought with the particle concept, where this ancient philosophy, and what's funny is they discount the idea of metaphysics. They say metaphysics is bogus thinking as well as theology. And actually and this isn't the Kabbalion, they say actually the only true way to think is through, actually, believe it or not, religion or philosophy. But that being said, and this is something we always hark on, it's like, no, we're not talking about metaphysics. We're talking about physics. We're talking about real science here. And so they talk about also the principle of rhythm, which is kind of what Walter Russell really shows through his chart, his periodic chart, which, by the way, I'm not sure if you can see, but I have it up on my wall behind me, Bear. So see that behind my right shoulder? That's actually Walter Russell's periodic chart, which is we should put in the resources
up on the screen here.
Hang
on a second.
And what Walter Russell was able to do was he's showing the reality of these minerals and how they're not static in their specific metallic form, but are actually going through these different octaves. And
can you see that, Mike, or does that only show when? Okay, so there's the chart right there on the right. Can you see it?
Yep, that's it. And I've got a little bit more, I guess, visually, aesthetically designed one for the poster, but it's the same thing. Yeah, it's got that spiral showing all the different octaves with the different minerals. And it's really interesting because in the Hermetic, and not to keep harping on the Hermetic stuff, but I think it's really important because I think it's the basis for all occult, all esoteric thinking that is essentially comes from ancient wisdom from the source, or they call the all, which is exactly what Walter Russell pulled from. And essentially it's the same exact stuff, Walter Russell just took it to the scientific level that they have deep down in their dark archives. But what's crazy is they talk about, and this is something I really want to get into, is that they talk about the three aspects of reality, which is the body, mind, and spirit. And they say that within that, there's 7 levels of each. And then within each level, there's 7 levels within that, which is exactly what Walter Russell shows. And they talk about mind, that minerals actually have their own dimension of mind. So minerals, while we call them inorganic elements, they're actually, each individual mineral is its own little species, if you will. It's its own little living entity that has its own mind dimension. So everything.
Well, and yeah, sorry to interrupt, but there's no such thing as inanimate objects, and like in the mineral world, we just say, oh, that's a rock or something. It's really not alive. Well, there's only one thing in the universe, and we already use the term prana, so we'll stick with that. And what that is it's intelligent light. You can call it the G word, God. You can call it the spirit that moves through all things. But it's a real living intelligence, which just happens to be us. We're just an individualized form of that. And then the different nuances of the minerals are simply qualified, I don't want to say bits because it's not, particles, but it's qualified prana to vibrate in a certain way. So whatever you look at, or whatever you experience, there's no such thing as animate. It's all alive, living substance that you gave to life, or gave life to in a particular form so that you can have this experience. And
Yeah,
when you look at that
everything.
chart behind you, what it's really showing is, rather than the periodic table of elements that we memorized in school, unfortunately, it shows how there's 9 octaves. And I have a little slide I'll show in a minute, but there's 9 octaves. Each octave has a certain number of tonal fields, and each octave represents a certain portion of what we consider the elements on a periodic table. And if anybody doubts the reality of any of this, or that this is just one guy's idea, it wasn't just Walter Russell's idea. He just did the best way of depicting it. And also, Walter Russell is the guy that first discovered the transuranium elements, named them and patented them. And you can look up the patents to this day. And then the governments of the world stole those patents and renamed them. But, we wouldn't even have an atomic age if it wasn't for Walter Russell understanding that these things existed beyond our sensory apparatus in the first place. So each one of the octaves that represents different tonal fields. Yeah, Mike, just say something so people can see the book there.
Oh, sorry. I'm right now showing on the video Atomic Suicide by Walter and Lau Russell, which isn't, it looks like it's backwards maybe, but on the screen. But this is an amazing book where I recommend everybody read. It's actually a pretty fun, for Walter Russell terms, kind of a fun one to read too. Actually, I'm opening it up for the first time because I only read I got the print version now. Beautiful book. But anyways, what radioactivity is, why and how it kills, what to do about it. So not only did he discover it, but then he warned the world to not pull it out of the ground. But of course, they did the opposite.
Yeah, atomic energy is not innately evil in and of itself. It's only a problem when you have Neanderthals playing with levels of energy, that they not only don't understand, but have no control over. So we're just trying to control our own thoughts. Humanity is now quarantined and creating in a very confined space in order to have the experience before we're let out of into the open space, so to speak, to create bigger and better things. But, the reason why Walter and even a lot of other great ones said, yeah, don't mess with that stuff, is because it's like giving children matches to play with. And it's not suggesting that humanity is infantile or inherently dumb, because originally when we were first popped into this simulation, we were in what some people would call a very lofty state and understood everything. And we descended, we'll say, in consciousness to the point where we're, witnessing the stupid things that are going on in the world these days. But that wasn't our original nature. That's not who we are. And there are certain controllers on this planet that really aren't controllers, but we give away our power to them, and they keep us in this mindset that somehow, we're at a certain level of understanding and we can't go any further, and humans just inherently do bad things. That's really not the truth.
You mean
Now,
we're not
each
all
of these
just
9 octaves.
you mean we're
Go
not
ahead,
all
Mike.
just monkeys that have evolved from an ape?
Yeah, then they throw out people like Darwin from the Royal Society, with theories, in order to, um, keep us in the new scientific theory of, oh, we descended, or rose from the apes, and then of course, just so they don't lose anybody in the stupefaction, they create religions, which is a way of bastardizing true spirituality, and then come up with the creationist theory, which is still not going to tell us the truth of who we are, our origins, and what our true potential is. So either way, they've got you in the world of polarities, whether you're on one side or the other, and then you're in control. Now, when you go back to those 9 octaves that create all of the elements, each one is guarded by a little portal called an inert gas, and the inert gases, some of us actually use these in devices in order to create energy fields where we can more powerfully and immediately manifest certain creations into matter. That'll be a great story for another time. But Walter Russell was the first one that understood how those works. Think of them as little stargates. And we occupy, starting with hydrogen on the 4th octave. If you jump up into the 5th, that's what the carbon octave is. And the carbon is the backbone of our little reality. And that's where it gets interesting as far as minerals and the food we eat, and why it's important, and how we can grow better food and make better supplement products if we understand how things work in the first place. So we're not off on a tangent in metaphysics here. We are going to bring it back down right now to what minerals are and why we should know more about them if we're going to take supplements or do anything of the such. I'll do a quick screen share again,
Yeah.
Mike. You jump in whenever you want to.
I was going to say this, an important distinction is we're talking about analog technology here. And this is something in the digital era. And I feel like you talk about those controllers, right? The ones that are really trying to maintain this deep density of control and keeping us ignorant. They have pushed the digital age, and they're pushing transhumanism and all these things because it really solidifies their very narrow scope of materialism, because materialism in essence is digital. It's the idea that it's pixelating reality right down to a fine point, or like you said, magic BBs, which I love. And when in reality, everything is analog. So there is no finite point ever. Everything's always in motion. Everything's always a variable, a variant of the next thing. So you're never actually you're never actually happy or sad. You're in between. You can never say it's light or dark, right? Because the night gets dark and dark, but you have elements of light, and then you're always moving towards daylight. You're always moving towards night. Not the best analogies, but you get what I'm saying. Everything's analog. So this is something that we need to remember. And this is something I always talk about, is trying to get back into developing new analog technologies that can really free humanity. So whether this be crystal technologies or things related to the tonal fields and the Walter Russell physics, this is where we're going. We're moving back towards really brilliant analog technology that will power us into space and allow us to live much longer, because that's the true nature of reality. It's not digital. So that's my spiel.
And what a wonderful segue into what we're going to be talking about today with transitional elements, which are the analog analogs between the keynotes that we think of as our trace minerals that we need for nutrition or for growing food. We'll talk about transitional elements. And there is no one.
Here's a great question real quick, Bear, just because it's something that will help. Hope Light was asking, is an octave a dimension?
Well, they're both just words. They can be confusing because we use those words in different ways. And a lot of people, when they're exploring the multi-dimensional universe, so to speak, we're just understanding that there's more going on than meets the eye. So I think a more technically correct word when you get into the actual physics of how things work is octaves. There's a certain amount of them. And in our octave, which is, three-dimensional simulation, there can only be three dimensions. And it's very popular for people in metaphysics to talk about all these different dimensions. But in fact, there can only be three. And Tesla and a lot of the other great minds explain the power or the magic of the 3 times 3. And we could explain that with, some Walter Russell diagrams and explain them. But 3 dimensions is all that's possible. There's 3 variations of 3 dimensions that are going on all the time. And so in our reality, in our particular octave, which is the 5th carbon octave, there are a certain number of tonal fields that allow us, to have our palette to create with a carbon backbone in any which way we can. But it's finite, and in a way, we live in a infinite universe, in that we can keep creating without limit, but it's not infinite because there's always room to put more thought processes into the creative flow that will then put more electrical forces into the simulation. And so, but it's always limited by how far humanity goes in order to put those forces into activity. So it's unlimited, but it's finite. And the point I'm trying to make is the carbon octave is finite, in that we have certain analogs to work with within this realm. And when we go to the next octave, which some people call the ascension, then, we have more possibilities that open up to us. While I mentioned the word ascension, I was really pleased that like on Dark Journalist, they start to use that word, because that, seems a little too woo-woo for most people. But when you're talking about the elements going through the octaves, what we're really trying to explain is there's no such thing as like carbon, and it just is carbon, because carbon will journey through the octaves and eventually come back full circle to hydrogen. And so just like microbes in the body, if you recall, we talked about them. Well, there's all sorts of different levels that you look at under the microscope. A bacteria will become a fungus and then go back to another little germ level, and so forth. So all of nature is cyclic, including our human experience. We aren't this body. This body is one little, picture frame in a time paradigm, which of course is another fabrication. So when you go to, let's see, I'm trying to get to this next slide here. Let me share this again. Okay.
Yeah,
All right, here we go.
The octaves thing is really interesting in terms of relating music as a universal language too, and how every human pretty much resonates with music, and there's a reason why. It's
Yeah, and then in all the metaphysical teachings of all times, they always talked about the music of the spheres. Well, that's a real thing. And one other thought I was just want to complete. When we talk about the fact that there's only one substance, so not really substance, but one active intelligence that we then differentiate with minerals and all the ways that we qualify that energy with our consciousness. It gets back to who we really are. And the most scientific explanation of who we are is can be summarized in 2 words, and that is I am. Now, in the old Asian school, the eastern part of the world, that was uh, uh, depicted with just a sound frequency, which was and I am, of course, is an English interpretation of I am, or I am is an English interpretation of And what it does is it takes it to the next level. It integrates the 2 hemispheres. You know, the eastern part of the world was the keeper of certain knowledge for a long time. And then the Western world developed, which is now being demonized. But the Western world has the most important, at least half of the importance of how humanity is to develop. And that is how to use our consciousness in a very specific way. That's where, you know, the so-called scientific method, real science, not the stuff we're taught, comes into place. And then we're supposed to integrate the 2. So when we talk about I am, it is the recognition of our individualization within consciousness, our self-actualization as individualized creators, and our ability to create what what we're here to create. And the eastern part of the world, back in the day before the world was so homogenized, used to look at all, with at the people in the West that could create cities and all these amazing technologies. And then meanwhile, the folks that were getting into metaphysical studies would look in all at the people of the East that could have out-of-body experiences, like it was a natural thing. The point is we are supposed to be integrating the 2, and the integration of the 2 is perfectly explained with those same 2 words, which is I am. It's a frequency, and it connotes exactly who we are. Now, as soon as we qualify I am, like I am a father, I am a carpenter, whatever, now you're limiting the I am, and you're back in the matrix. And just like when we qualify a substance, a mineral, as say carbon, well, now you're creating a distinction within the universal life force, which really doesn't exist per se, but it's so we have to know what we're doing when we're playing with these substances, when we're acknowledging ourselves as an individualization. It's really time that we grow up and understand our play in it. Otherwise, we're going to forever be trapped within the matrix. And certain people that perpetuate the mythology are going to use that against us and create wars and environmental destruction and all the things that we experience on the planet today. So if we want out of the matrix, if we want to become real creators, then we have to just be a little smarter about things. So here we are. Let's go into slide 3. And hopefully you can see that. So let's bring it back into nutritional understandings of minerals. Humic, fulvic, sourced ionic minerals. So humic and fulvic acids are the breakdown constituents of natural decay of plant and animal materials formed through the chemical and biological humification in plant and animal matter. That's what we use in our products. That's humic and fulvic are a big buzzword out there. People are saying, wow, it's the most important thing we should be taking into our body because they're predigested minerals, has everything in it, and it's also a source of ionic minerals, which are simply minerals with a charge that allow them to mix with water molecules and be better absorbed in our body. So humic and fulvic acids also provide minerals so that our receptor sites and biochemical sites in the body are saturated with the things that are actually going to conduct electricity in the way we need for perfect health. And rather than having those places vacant because we're deficient, and those vacancies in those receptors are going to invite the stupid stuff in with their spraying in the sky and giving us in medicines and things, and then that will block the receptors and slow down the normal neurological function, make us literally lower IQ, and give us a very shortened lifespan. Second point, humic acid is a large molecule of bioavailable minerals for mammals, but not absorbed by plants. So humic is the same as fulvic, break down materials of plants in a predigested form, but humic acid can be taken up by mammals, but not plants. Fulvic acid is smaller, so it can be absorbed by plants. And we use fulvic in our formulations because we use it as a carrier medium to get things into the smaller spaces in the pores of the cell. So fulvic can be utilized very efficiently. That's why you want to know about humic and fulvic. Let's finish this up. Ionic minerals possess a positive or negative charge that readily bonds with water molecules for bodily absorption. We already said that. Ionic minerals are derived from humic and fulvic acids. Yeah, got that. Ionic and trace minerals conduct and generate electrical impulses to facilitate every bodily function without exception. Now, because the minerals are those little nuanced, forms of energy that we call the periodic elements. They are like the wires in the house. They conduct electricity, and without them, nothing's going to work properly because we are electrical in nature. We aren't particles, we're electrical waveforms. And when minerals are understood from the perspective of waveform mechanics, then we understand that, wow, these are even more important than just providing something that we think works on a biochemical particulate model of reality. And humic fulvic is the most desirable source of valuable predigested minerals and provides the most basic vitality tonic necessary for human health. Now, in the eastern part of the world, in Ayurvedic medicine, they isolated stuff oozing from the rocks. They called shilajit, and all that is humic fulvic. What we use these days comes from pristine sources. It's purified without tampering with the natural properties at all, and it's actually better. And sometimes when you get shilajit from other parts of the world, you might be getting other contaminants along with it. So we use a source where it's not only purified but comes from an area that's never been messed with technologies or industry and so forth. So let's go on to the next one, and I'll get out of screen share. The next one is the transitional elements. And Michael, this goes right into analog versus digital. Now, when you look at the periodic table of elements that we were taught in school, that's a digital concept. That means, okay, you have this element, then the next element, but it doesn't talk about the things in between. And when you use things more in a musical or tonal field understanding, and you play a chord on the piano, well, all the information that makes things sound harmonically melodic and so forth, that is the informational fields between the keynotes. And without that information, you have just kind of flatter music. That's why CD recordings that are more digital, real audio files prefer the old vinyl, because it had all the analog information in between. It was much more rich and satisfying. And when we have food that's devoid of the transitional elements, when we devise formulas for supplementation that are devoid of the transitional elements, the body just doesn't fare as well because the body's more clever about understanding the missing notes in between the key notes than we are with our musical ears. So transitional elements, we call them the missing link. And let's just jump in if there's any questions, and we'll go into that slide next.
Yeah, well, this might take us down. I know we were going to touch on this, but might as well jump into it now. Matt in here goes by masculine. He was saying, is this something that can be extracted for humus-rich soil in terms of soil health? And of course, this is a major, major focus for us in terms of our farm and how we grow our jiao gulan and grow stuff, is reintroducing this into the topsoil, right?
Yeah. Minerals are very devoid of soil is very devoid of minerals. Organic food has maybe, if you're lucky, 30% of the minerals it should have. And we'll talk about when the soil is deficient in that way, especially deficient of calcium, which we'll also elaborate on. It's actually becomes toxic because that food cannot be utilized normally, because when those minerals are deficient, that greatly affects the liver, which in turn greatly affects the entire digestive system. And not only do we not get what we need, but we have incomplete digestion, which leads us into all the gut health problems that people like to talk about these days. And so the food, even though it's organic and maybe free of pesticides and GMOs, it's still toxic, because if it's deficient, it sets us up for all sorts of problems. So what we do in our permaculture farm, and the teaching we do, is show people not how to just dump a bunch of fertilizers on, because if the electrical properties of the soil are not in a proper resistance range, the way we talk about it, you can add all the minerals and amendments to the soil you want, and it's still not going to be taken up by the plants. You have to create the right resistance zone. We do the same thing with human bodies when we treat them clinically. We don't just say, here, take all this crap. What we do is do testing to find out how we can budge the person's electrical zone in a proper range. So now that human or the plant rootlets, either way, are going to be able to absorb what's in the soil. And what you find is you don't even have to use a fraction of the fertilizers to do it. So there's a lot that we need to know. That's why this mineral topic is so important, but even more important that we know what minerals are, not particulates, but they are actual electrical forces. We're playing an electrical game. And as long as we're in the superstition of materialism, we're going to have a lot of problems in our health. We're going to run out of good topsoil. And, people will not have the ability to raise their consciousness, because that is going to be predicated on a nervous system that operates the way it was originally designed, which is a superconductor, so that informational fields have no impedance when they're traveling through the networks. And so no information is lost, and it also allows us to perceive in other bandwidths. So that is one of the reasons why all the fake food and GMOs and issues we have with food have been perpetuated, because it keeps us in that limited state of consciousness. So this isn't just, you need minerals for your physical health, but it's also to feed your consciousness, so that our vehicle, our body as we think of it, is capable of bringing us through the journey that we're here to experience in the first place. So let's go back and just finish on some points on transitional elements.
Can I just say something real quick there on that?
Yeah.
A lot of times I think people say, then, well, if we have this, if we're, we create our own reality and we're this perfect, we are a manifestation of perfection, then why do we need to do all this stuff to stay healthy? And I'll just say that we've done it to ourselves, and also we've allowed it to be done to ourselves. This is really a Garden of Eden planet. This is an Eden planet. We were originally supposed to be just kind of living in this paradise kind of garden planet where our food would, nature takes care of itself. That's why we stress permaculture. If you let nature do its thing and leave it unadulterated, the soil health will be optimized, and we will, originally man probably lived in this Garden of Eden. That's where the original, parable comes from, or whatever, where you just go pick fruit, live off the fruit of the land, and you'd have all your sustenance. But unfortunately, we've screwed it all up.
Yeah, and there's one thing we can't be saved from, and that's our own thoughts and beliefs and emotions, which give those thoughts and beliefs to have the velocity to pop in the matrix in the first place. And all of us have our issues, and nobody's preaching to someone else or acting above it, but there is ample evidence, not only, that's been laid out since the beginning of time by the great ones for us to understand, but also ways to apply that. So you can get little glimpses of how things really work, even though you're still seduced into the whole thing, like we all are. The proof of the pudding is that we're all still here, having the experience. We're learning. And so it's not a matter of beating ourselves up because we still have problems, or by acting holier than thou and thinking somehow we're smarter than the next guy. Because if we're so smart, we would have been, on to the next experience a long time ago. So, yeah, our thoughts and our emotions and our beliefs are exactly what create our reality. And I have people all the time, especially in the health field, they might be getting, some good results in one area, but then say, well, geez, why does my knee still hurt or something? I'm reading all these great books and entertaining these, ideas about higher consciousness. Well, here's the deal. It's like an accountant sheet. At the end of every day, I would challenge everybody to do this. In one column, tally up all the thoughts, emotions, and things that were put into play that say, I'm an unlimited, all-powerful spiritual being having a human experience, and my consciousness is putting electrical thoughts into form, and this isn't really what I think it is, and so forth. Versus the other column, tally up how many times did I say bullshit like, well, I still got to pay the rent. So, most of us, even those of us that are avid seekers and students, if we're honest with each other or with ourselves, at the end of the day, we're probably going to say, a lot of my thoughts were still on BS. Again, nobody's bad, but it's old habits sometimes die hard. And, we're in the process of learning and also putting new habits into motion. And a single lifetime in the scheme of things isn't that big of a deal. It's a flash in the pan. So maybe we have to keep working on it. Maybe it's not just like reading a book and I'm enlightened, or I do a new Qigong practice and my problems are over with. Or else, like a lot of people do, they'll do that for a few days and say, oh, that didn't work, on to the next thing. So, we're a product of ourselves, and we have to, apply ourselves. Nothing's going to be handed to us on a silver platter. And it just might take some time, some trial and error, and we might just have to suffer through all of our worst doubts and fears, and stand up against the critics and all the talking heads that say that's a bunch of crap and woo woo and everything, and like the trolls out there on podcasts like this that get their 2 bits worth in. But the fact is all the things that we were taught from birth on is junk science. So let's get into the next slide. I think I already promised that. Let's go here. Okay, transitional elements are those informational fields between the keynotes, or what you correctly termed analog. And let's just go through properties of the transitional elements. Oh, and by the way, to finish that question before that somebody asked, elements that we think of as the major things like carbon, calcium, and things in soil are deficient, but the transitional elements, therefore, are also very deficient. So you have to have a way to harvest these transitional elements, which you can do from water in certain ways. You can do certain processes from other kinds of minerals in order to concentrate the transitional elements. And then you take those concentrations and put them back into your mineral formula. So not only do you have the keynotes, but you have an abundance of transitional elements. And let's go on from there. Each element occupies a unique pressure zone within tonal fields of 9 octaves that lend specific properties. Okay, that sounds like, what the heck does that mean? Well, think of an organ, pipe organ, where you're working the pedals with your feet. You're building up pressure so that the tonal fields will rise in and out of, up and down into the different octaves. And that's what minerals are. And, you know, there's not like one note in a, or single notes in a pipe organ. You're creating pressure zones in order for those notes to morph one into the other. And that's exactly what minerals are. That's why there's no such thing as carbon or calcium as a single entity. Those are just different pressure zones that will then go full circle through all the other pressure zones and then start back at the beginning of what we call something like hydrogen. All elements transition through each phase of the periodic table in a full circle procession back to their hydrogen origins. Okay. Transitional elements represent the informational fields between the keynotes as recognized in the study of chemistry and behave similar to the harmonics within musical chords. Effects of transitional elements on human physiology. This is where it gets more relevant. The essential actions of minerals on human physiology are activated by the transitional elements. So if you have isolated elements, as in, you know, typical mineral forms, like you can take calcium and you can derive it from certain mineral sources, and it will have a tendency to be concentrated in a certain form of that mineral. Well, if it's devoid of all the transitional elements, it's really not going to work as well. And when you add the transitional elements, it actually activates those keynotes to work even better, just like making music sound better when you have the analog information in between. Regular dietary concentrations of transitional elements let's see, I can't read my own thoughts here. Of transitional elements recondition the innate superconductive attributes of the nervous system. Mentioned this already. The nervous system is a superconductor, and if it was never tampered with in the first place and never had junk put into it, we would have absolutely no impedance to information. Everything would happen instantly. You would be able to tune in again to those broader bandwidths that would give you the information that we're all seeking, and things would operate flawlessly. And also, if people understand what a superconductor is, that means that you have very little or no energy necessary at all from the outside in order to keep the system going. That's what we call 0-point energy. That's actually why we call our supplement line of minerals 0 point. That's not just a kind of a cute little marketing term. It's actually a reality. And when we understand what Tesla and Walter and Schauberger, Steiner, and a lot of the other ones all knew, our technologies right now would not need outside input. They would simply be initiated in certain ways according to these understandings, and you'd never have to source information outside of a closed system in the first place. And the original superconductor is the human body, and that's why the great ones also used to admonish us, know thyself and you will know the universe. Okay, next one. Transitional elements greatly enhance pineal activity. You know, everybody's trying to take all sorts of stuff in order to activate their pineal. Also recognize things that they put in our water, like fluoride, calcify the pineal. Geez, must just be a mistake. I'm sure they wouldn't mean to do that on purpose. But when the pineal activity is activated, especially through these transitional elements, then again, we can perceive in ways and read between the lines in ways that we would have formerly thought impossible. And then we would rethink our entire reality. Transitional element activated minerals restore kidney energy reserves. In Chinese medicine, we're always talking about the kidneys being kind of our bank accounts that we come into this matrix with, and we tend to use them up inordinately without replenishing them. Well, transitional elements, along with certain herbs we understand how to use, can restore kidney reserves with transformative effects on every organ system without exception. The next slide before I let you get a word in, Mike, we're going to talk about calcium, but anybody out there want to throw their 2 bits worth in?
Well, the transitional elements, I think, for me, was one of the biggest eye openers when I first started chatting with you, God, a decade ago, and you started educating me on that, because that's a secret I think that most people don't know about. And we talked about, originally the fellow David, who invented or discovered or what he called the orbitally rearranged monatomic elements, right? Orm,
Yeah.
which we call the transitional elements. And you know, I was just like, for instance, this morning I was just taking the gold platinum group one that we have. It's good for hormonal balance and such, and we get into the idea of monatomic gold. And again, the history of that, with supposedly the Anunnaki coming and mining that and using us as slaves to do that, et cetera, or even genetically and changing us. They came here to mine that. Just curious, any thoughts on the monatomic gold and how that relates to this?
Yeah, I prefer the term transitional elements because it coincides with a real model of physics that we can validate in certain ways, whereas orbitally rearranged monatomic elements, is more of an understanding, trying to term what David discovered in his soil science back in the late 80s, early 90s. And I've told this story where we actually, had a meeting with him over in Maui, where we had our clinic at the time, right after he made that discovery. And we were finding certain things like concentrates from aloe, as an example, that we could show had high concentrations, natural concentrations of these monatomic elements, especially the gold platinum group. And then in certain circles, they're taking large concentrations of these. And some people were anecdotally reporting that they were having all these great changes in their consciousness. I never participated in taking bushels of aloe concentrate and everything to see what would happen, because I just believe it's an inside job, and I think a lot of those things are wonderful and will help our journey get there a little better. But you can't just take something from the outside and achieve enlightenment. So, but that was going on in those circles, and I do
So
believe
you're
there's a lot of
saying,
validity to what they're saying.
so you're
Go ahead.
saying they were literally taking boatloads of aloe extract that had these transitional elements to like initiate pineal gland activation, do like out of body stuff or stuff like that?
Yeah, and and some individuals reporting all these remarkable things, and I'm not doubting them. I just don't know firsthand, even though I was in at the very beginning with this technology and understanding it from a certain level, how it was a valid concept and how it would create very special effects in the nervous system. You're always going to have a few people that take it the next level. Again, I don't know if there's any truth to it or not, but that is a part of myself where I like to stay a little bit grounded, and also understand that everything is about consciousness. And when we, maybe put it all on a powder that we can take from the outside, and that's going to do it for us, then I think we're back in the same box of giving our power away to something. So, always I would just, again, this is just my belief system. I think if we always return back to the fact that we have everything within ourselves, and then understand how those things that we think of external to us, that really aren't external to us, can be used intelligently in ways to enhance our experience, I think that's better than, going into the thing of, oh, if I take this, I'm going to live forever, or, be enlightened, or some such thing. So, we had all that stuff. And of course, Maui was a breeding ground for woo woo. And, so we're just kind of used to that. Whereas meanwhile, as a clinician, and I'm very open minded, and some of the things I talk about, I get it seems way too far out there for most people, but everything I talk about, I can validate in certain ways and show technologies and clinical practices that actually authenticate how those things work and that they aren't woo woo. So you want to have an open mind, but at the same time, be grounded in your application and understand, well, that it still gets back to everything being in your own lap. So when we met
Yeah,
with
very much.
David, understood what he was dealing with, where he would concentrate some of these substances and they'd do weird things, like they'd float, they'd defy the known law or the conventional laws of physics, and they just wouldn't behave like normal elements. And also they would morph, from moment to moment in one state to another. So, again, they were transitional, and it kind of proved that these things aren't these keynotes where you can just count on picking up a tuning fork and C sharp and hit it, and you're going to hear the same note all the time. Those analog fields are representing those things that are much more um, able to morph, according to a lot of subtle forces that are at play all the time that we don't always recognize. So
Wow.
Orm, unfortunately, I think, just created the concept that these were elements, and trying to make them fit into conventional chemical concepts. And meanwhile, people like Walter Russell, with a deeper understanding, just like real biochemistry and microbial biology, we know that everything is always in transition, in the state of becoming, and there's nothing that's ever cast in stone or a distinct thing within this matrix, even though it appears that way to our senses.
Really interesting too. Very wise what you just said. And I can relate it to so many things in terms of these people essentially biohacking with this aloe to, have some like psychonaut type of experience, which I think is really cool because I'm really into that. But what you really hit the nail on the head there is that's not the end game here. That's not as important as the internal development. And that's why we are so powerful as the human species, because if you relate it back to the the theories about the Anunnaki coming here, and they're just supposedly this advanced space race that you can travel from planet to planet. They're coming here to harvest this monatomic gold that we call this transitional gold. That shows that they have put themselves in a box, and that they are relying on this one element to power their technology. If you go by the theories here, where we, if we understand our own internal power, don't need that. And we are actually way more powerful because we have, unfortunately, in many ways, we've subverted ourselves into that same kind of mindset that the Anunnaki had. And whether they took a big part in that or not, but it doesn't matter. In the end, understanding the internal power that we have as infinite spiritual creatures or beings is so important. So very wise words. I do have a couple questions here. People are still having some issues understanding transitional elements. Here's a question. Is it like an element that is in the process of changing the composition of subatomic? And we're going into atomic here once again, guys. So we want to get away from that, think more analog, think more musically. But is it like an element that is in the process of changing the composition of subatomic particles until it becomes another element? So we got to get away from that thinking, guys, of the particle thinking, and get into the idea of analog music, and in the idea of that we aren't stuck in once again the digital versus analog. We're not stuck in this particle mentality. Things are always transitioning. Everything is transitioning, and so it's the principle of correspondence, as above, so below. So in just the way you're transitioning in life constantly, down to the minute parts of minerals are doing the same thing. What would you say?
And in your own life stream, we can all look at pictures of ourselves when we were kids. Well, that doesn't exist anymore, any more than the present harmonic is what we see in the mirror every morning, and that's going to keep changing and changing and changing. And the best way to think about these elements is that you have a guitar and you pluck a string that's static, there's no vibration, and now you hook it up to a meter that can create a waveform that's going to mirror the frequency coming out from that guitar string as it's vibrating. and you're going to see, at its peak when you first hit it, it's going to have some very demonstrative waves, peaks and valleys, and then it's going to gradually level out into just a flat line. And we can use the same analogy for our life. Nobody dies, but you just flatline until you want to plunk the string again and have another experience until you get it. But when it comes to the elements, those elements are the same. That original keynote that you plucked on the string is going to morph through a waveform that is going to go through many transitions until that just goes back down to flatline. And it's no different than when you look at a waveform that you're looking at a tonal field that maybe science recognizes as hydrogen. Now, hydrogen, is one of the things that gets us into this fifth octave experience, because it's just begins to resonate at a level that the average senses or technological extensions of our senses can recognize as something that exists in the matrix in the first place. And then the frequencies beyond hydrogen within the fifth octave keep getting more and more robust until they actually take on what we think of as more physical properties. I always thought another interesting side note is that hydrogen, appears on the waveform at exactly about 33 degrees, which for you esoteric people out there might, when you want to get into all the Masonic lore and that sort of thing, that 33 degrees. Well, there's a lot of significance to that. It's where the matrix first comes into being. And there's people that understand these simple little truths. And then, then you have all the arguments and discussions and things about what 33 means and is it good, is it bad? It's just, no, this stuff is like basic stuff.
Excuse me. Probably does this also probably relate to? And I don't want to get too off topic real quick, but to geometry.
Too late.
To the geometry and stuff. In terms of all the sacred geometry and everything.
Absolutely, because each frequency, and you can see this with the practice of cymatics, where you place certain frequencies and subject particles of sand to the frequencies, they form different geometrical forms. Well, every element is going to have a different geometrical form depending on the frequency. So all those geometries play in creating three-dimensional pictures as we experience them, and then you put them all together, and we have pretty elaborate simulations that are amazing if you think about what we're actually doing. And with the hydrogen, we're saying, well, it just kind of appears 33. If you look at a waveform and you do an equator, and I don't want to get into all this stuff because it's really not that hard to understand, but it's a new language and way of thinking of things, so it seems real technical when it's not. But when you have an equator and a waveform going up and down, like go back to the guitar string there, well, the sound first happens, and in the case of a tonal field, we call an element, it's 33 degrees, which is hydrogen, until it gets 90 degrees perpendicular, where it's like, right at the peak of a wave. And that's what we call a fully repolarized state of full electrical charge. That's where your flashlight, you turn on with some fresh batteries, you have a nice, bright beam, and that's a totally charged repolarized state. And carbon, it's a backbone of the fifth octave because it's the most stable structure. And another way to think of it is these waveforms are not actually waveforms, they're spirals that are always moving in certain directions. And these spirals, again, waveform, if you look three-dimensionally and put a pencil through a waveform, well, actually it's doing this instead of just up and down. And then the waveform is always going, in and out in its journey through the octaves. And that's how the, one element, when it's past 33 degrees, it gets to the peak of 90 degrees. it's going to really represent a spiraling centripetal force. It's like informational fields that are very tightly bound. And if you just take some string and tightly, wind it around a spool versus take the same string and throw it up in the air, so it's just a big, kind of, mess. Well, it's not going to be as solid. And so carbon, for instance, in the fifth octave, and we think of diamonds when we think of carbon because it's a carbon derivative. It's one of the hardest substances that we know of, and it only appears hard in simulation because it's matter that's tightly wound that represents that 90-degree perpendicular. And I think that's probably as technical as we want to get. But I just tell folks that are listening, get the concepts. Don't try to outthink this stuff with your brain. Just get the points we're trying to make. And then, if you can go there and then you go back to your high school chemistry, things start really falling apart and are not only oversimplistic, but they aren't even congruous. And some of this stuff actually starts making more sense. And the most important thing is the ramifications of how we think of ourselves, our reality, and our place in the simulation. All of a sudden, there's no more limits. So that's why we talk about this stuff in the first place, not to sound smart or cutting edge on anything. It's just the way it works, and we really need to get over the hump with this stuff. So let's do a quick share here.
Yeah, that was a great point too, because we get stuck thinking in like 2D or like the wave idea with the equator, but really everything's obviously more like you were saying, almost like a vortex, right? Of these conical circular movements, not just an up down 2D wave. It's actually a full 3D embodiment. So you've got we have to think in those terms more.
Yeah, when I study electrical engineering, I'm looking at books that have pictures of waveforms, but they aren't depicting it in its three-dimensional, ever-transitioning state, which would really tell you how things work. All right, this slide here is calcium is key. So I'll bring this back to a nutritional soil science level. Calcium, again, it's one of those transitional states of being. It's not a separate entity, but when it takes on this level of frequency, it provides very important things. And, there's a time decades ago when they started studying calcium and they just realized, wow, this stuff is necessary for every single biological function. Therefore, we, really need to start supplementing this. And now, decades later, we find people are having problems. Well, they're taking all these calcium supplements and they've got calcium deposits in certain areas where they shouldn't be, and they aren't even assimilating all the time the calcium they need to do what they're taking it for in the first place. And that's because calcium, when properly understood, it's the best. It occupies an electrical zone that is very powerful in moving us into a proper resistance level. And when I say resistance level, people would more relate to that as talking about pH, acid versus alkaline. But acid versus alkaline is actually an electrical property, so it's better understood in that way, or more true to real life. So let's just read this. Calcium is key. Every bodily system and tissue is maintained through liver function, which is in turn dependent on the correct form and type of calcium. That's absolutely true. If you're calcium deficient, and our soil is extremely calcium deficient, your liver is going to suffer, and your liver is not only operates to make all your other functions, especially your digestive functions, work, but anything that you take into your body, your liver actually puts a signature frequency stamp on every single molecule, and that signature stamp is unique to you alone in the universe, which means it's the key that will make that element work. So if your liver is not operating with 100% efficiency, not only will everything else suffer, but you won't even be able to utilize the stuff that you are getting in the first place.
Wow, that was
So
that
biological.
was crazy what you just said. What you just said was a lot right there. That's amazing. That just shows how incredibly amazing we all are. Anyways.
Yeah, so with our nutritional sciences and practices, a little bit of information beyond the conventional can really be grounded and helpful. This isn't academic, far-reaching stuff. And the more you understand the truth, the easier it is to understand than the stuff we're taught is the truth. Because most people would probably agree that, hey, when I was in school, I sucked at math and I sucked at biochemistry. Whereas if somebody just wrapped their mind around some of these concepts, and if they could unlearn all the other crap, they'd come to the conclusion that, like, wow, I get it.
Yeah, we'd be
So,
living in a much different world, that's for sure. Knowledge is power, and we are systematically removed from that knowledge. Anyways, go ahead.
yeah. So biological life requires calcium by weight and volume more than any other element. And that just happens to be within our octave of experience. Calcium is a very prominent frequency that is very helpful for the way we construct things here with carbon backbones. Calcium deficient food is toxic. Well, we already touched on this, but if there's not enough calcium, your liver suffers, your digestion suffers, you can't assimilate things properly. And DNA synthesis, we could have pages of what calcium does. I just took a handful off the top of my head. DNA synthesis is calcium dependent. Well, we're talking about carbon 60 and jaugulan and all these things that repair DNA. And they're very important substances and can be helpful. But if you're missing calcium in the first place, well, then those other substances aren't going to work as well either. So that's why some people can take some carbon 60 and say, holy cow, it really fixed everything. And other people go, yeah, I kind of felt it, but it's a little bit more subtle. Well, there's a lot of other things at play. The more we know, the more we can orchestrate everything we need together at the same time, which of course is what we do in bioterrain medicine. We don't just say, oh, well, this herb we find is good for inflammation. We realize that there's ways to orchestrate things in a unique way for every single individual ecosystem so that those needs are met and not just relying on something that everybody says is the new trend. All right, so calcium assists the cellular uptake of all other minerals. That's why in soil science, if you do not have proper calcium levels in the soil, then the other minerals, no matter how much you dump into the soil, it's not going to be taken up into the roots of the plants in the first place. And the same thing for the human body. Without the proper calcium levels, then you're not going to absorb any of the other minerals, no matter how much you're taking. Okay, supplementation requires, this is a key one, the next one. Supplementation requires choosing the correct calcium, not just any calcium, the correct calcium to avoid undesirable deposits, which explains, again, if people are getting deposits and they say, oh, now I believe the calcium supplementation is dangerous, and some people are saying that, and then they're saying, well, you don't really need that much calcium, and these deposits prove it. Well, it's because people are not taking the right kind of calcium at the right time. And therefore, you're also going to have inefficient assimilation of the calcium that you do need. So correct calcium supplementation powerfully shifts body chemistry to a proper pH zone. That's why in ionization analysis, we look at the electrical resistant levels of the body by way of biochemical extrapolation of what we pick up in the fluids of the body. And then we use other things, but very much we use the right kind of calcium to shift the pH or the electrical resistance of the body in a more favorable zone, because in that zone, the body is going to efficiently pick up exactly as much and what it needs with very much less input from the outside. 3 calcium types, and then we'll calm down for questions
well,
here.
we're getting questions.
3 calcium types. Anionic, which is another way of saying alkaline. I like anionic because it connotes more the electrical understanding of what alkaline really is. And it has to do with resistant levels. So you have anionic calcium, which promotes greater electrical resistance. What is resistance? Well, go out in your garden, put a nozzle on the end of your hose, turn the water on so that you have a set amount of volume and of water coming through the end of the hose. Now tighten up the nozzle so that it has a thin stream, which is going to give it more velocity, more volume trying to get out of a smaller space. So it's going to travel farther and have, more pressure behind it. And that is what you call greater resistance. So if you're saying, I want to be more alkaline, what you're really saying is I want more electrical resistance. Now, there's sometimes where that's a good thing. Sometimes you need less resistance. So next one, cationic or acidic calcium to reduce electrical resistance. Now you open up the end of the hose and the water kind of spills out because there's less pressure buildup. Doesn't have as much velocity, even though there's the same volume of water coming out. That's what we call acidic. And what we're again talking about is electrical resistance levels. Sometimes you want electricity to flow through bodily systems with more resistance, higher velocity, sometimes less. And sometime in the future, Mike, let's have a talk about, there's no such thing as, I should just have an alkaline diet, because I can eat all sorts of alkaline food and it might do nothing to me. You might eat the same amount of alkaline food, the same exact diet, and it might create greater alkalinity in you, or greater resistance. And you get a third person that has the same exact alkaline diet, and he's going to react to those foods in a way that is going to actually make them acidic. So it's not about foods, again, external things doing things to us. It's how we react to external things. So one of the things we do in our old clinical days is some elaborate type of testing we call metabolic typing, based on a lot of principles put out by Ravici and other ones, where we'd understand if a person was sympathetic, parasympathetic, dominant, or if they, were slow oxidizers, fast oxidizers, and a whole bunch of other things that would tell us how they would react to foods. And if we determined through the ionization analysis that we needed greater resistance, well, first off, we know how this person's reacting to certain kinds of foods. And if we needed greater alkalinity, greater resistance, then we would then know which foods would do that in that person versus another food. So, the point of all that, just take away from it that one size does not fit all. It's not about being alkaline or not alkaline, and it's not about a food or anything external is going to fix us. We have to understand what makes us tick. And the thing that is going to have the most profound effect on our health is what we think and feel, if you don't do anything else, because you can eat bushels of celery, every day to make yourself more alkaline. And if you have toxic thoughts and emotions, then you're going to be, not only toxic, but overly acidic, no matter how much of that stuff you drink. All right. It's more important, in other words, to worry about what comes out of your mouth and not what you put into it. So the 3 calcium types, the last one is neutral pH calcium. Sometimes you need a neutral one to increase, to avoid increasing or reducing electrical resistance. And let's just finish up on this, and then we'll put the last slide aside. That one's about carbon. This is something you can see on our website. I'm not going to elaborate on it, but it talks about a simple way. It's not the most exact way, or, we do a lot of other things in the clinic when we're really determining people's zones, pH zones. We have to take into account conductivity and sugar levels and all sorts of things, urea and nitric zones and other things that all play into the resistance. But this will actually get you into the ballpark, and it might take just a little bit longer, but it will get you there if you do this. So you just take pH strips and real short. It tells you the numbers here. If your pH is in a certain range, then you do use, maybe more of an alkalinizing type of calcium. If your range is into this zone here, you might use a more of an acidifying calcium. And if you're in this range here, 6.2 to 6.7, and this is urine pH we're talking about, you might use a calcium that's more of a neutral calcium. And then another thing you can do is weekly, you take your saliva and your urine pH and you average them out. And this tells you how to average it out. You weight the saliva twice as much, add in the urine, and then divide them by 3. And then that kind of tells you if you're moving in the right range. And the right range ultimately is going to get you where your pH of your saliva is 6.4 and your urine is also 6.4 pH. And I guarantee everyone's going to go out now and look on the internet and say, oh, no, my saliva is supposed to be 7 and my urine's supposed to be 5 something. Well, no, that's a simplistic understanding if you aren't looking at the complete electrical resistance equation, which can only be derived through something called ionization analysis. And the last phase is there. Anybody can jump in right now, and we won't go too much longer, and then you can talk about whatever you want there, Mike.
Well, people are really into this. They're all wondering, people are asking what their calcium zone is. Chancho 11 was saying, I need to find out what my calcium zone is ASAP. I just shared a link to the calcium powders category, the 0 point, so people can look into that and the 3 different products we offer on our website. You can actually get into that, get some pH strips, do that process that Bear just went over, and then find out which calcium you need to start optimizing. And once again, this is all about optimizing your electrical system so the transitional elements can be more effective. One question from Hope Light. So does calcium have anything to do with my electrical sensitivity? If so, what should I take? So I assume she's, talking about, she's got sensitivity to EMF and stuff like that. This would probably relate back to doing the pH strips, right?
Yeah, it has everything to do with it, because if your electrical resistance in your body is optimal, then you're going to be less vulnerable to anything, including all these EMFs and things that we're exposed to these days. And you're going to just feel a whole lot better and be more resilient.
Yeah.
Not to mention your body is going to be in a regenerative mode rather than a deteriorating mode, which is what's happening to our bodies on this planet right now.
Yeah, and Russ here made a great point to reiterate what you said, because you just dropped about 500 nuggets of knowledge in that last 2 slides that we could do multiple Alfacasts on. But he said, wow, being negative creates an acidic environment in your body. I think that's what Dr. Lando alluded to. And I said, exactly. We need to understand that controlling our thoughts and emotions supersedes anything we eat. This is why we did that Alfacast on breathing techniques and how important that is for controlling, our fight or flight mechanisms and all of these things that create these acidic environments, or these environments that can be caustic to our health through our emotion anxieties we have, which are often a direct result from the specific matrix that we're in right now.
Yeah, and the most important part of this information is, it's valuable to know what kind of calcium to take and the role of transitional elements, and how our consciousness is fully at play no matter what we're doing. But the information is more valuable, and it opens us up to the possibilities of our real potential and the purpose of why we're here in the first place. And I don't know if it's the same Russ that I saw flash across my screen what do you call it, the Telegram. Forgive me, people, if I don't follow through with that all the time. It's just a time factor. But I think
Yes,
it's the
same
same
Russ.
Russ. He made a comment about alchemy when I was talking about how we make our tinctures, and the real alchemy is understanding the mechanics of waveforms put into motion by our own consciousness. And then we can apply that awareness to anything we do. And then it becomes apparent, even if we're making an herbal tincture, not just to follow some recipe that comes from the Middle Ages. They say, oh, if you do this, it's alchemy. Now we understand what they really understood firsthand, which is alchemy is duplicating how those waveforms transition in nature within ourselves to construct our whole reality, and use the same principles in every single thing we do, including making substances. So that's real alchemy. And the alchemy is changing our thoughts and taking the training wheels off. So again, we're not just trying to sell products here. I would be much happier if people just started understanding, what makes us tick in the first place, because not only will that set us free, but we'll need less external things, including products, to take in the first place. But
Yeah.
again, we're in transition, and it's a process, and we're getting there. And
Well,
sometimes
you
things are
just went
helpful.
you went full circle with that too, which is great, and takes us back to how we began with the first slide or second slide, which is talking about we are moving into the age of transmutation. It's exactly what alchemy is: the ability to transmutate our reality through our consciousness, and this can go on whatever octave we're on. So literally transmuting these elements via the transitional elements in our body through our thought. And this relates to how breatharianism can actually exist, and this relates to how you don't have to have a meat-based diet if you have this knowledge and you work on yourself internally, where you can literally transmute into your B12 or whatever you need. Because that's like one of the big things that I always get from the carnivore diet people who say, well, you can't be a vegan, you can't be vegetarian even because you're not getting B12. And that goes back to the particle basis concept that we've been so ingrained with, is that traditionally the understanding is B12 can only be truly got and its bioavailability is only through like fish or meat or whatever, or dairy. But when you have the grander concepts of transmutation, then that all goes out the window, right?
Yeah, and all these practices that we can apply nutritionally or lifestyle wise, what they're really meant to do is not just make our experience within this matrix more pleasant, but it's really to illustrate to ourselves how we tick and what our possibilities are. And we can explore all these discussions, which are a lot of fun, everything from breatharianism to veganism to paleo to transitional elements. And it's all great off-grid living, but it's the temptation for most of us. Sorry, that's my phone. I'll stop in a minute. The temptation for all of us is it becomes an identity politics, which is very prevalent these days. And I'm an off-gridder, or I'm a breatharian, I do martial arts, whatever. It's all great stuff, and it's a good way to explore your potentials. But as soon as you qualify, it goes back to what we're talking about. There's simply two words is all we need to know, is I am. And the moment we qualify those two words with anything afterwards, like breatharian, it's like, guess what? You're back in the same old box.
Yeah.
You're no longer just pure consciousness. You are identifying, and qualifying that, which means you're limiting yourself. And also these days, there's a lot of virtue signaling going on, where we want people to know that I'm this or that. And it really doesn't matter. We're here to support each other. in the journey, allow each other to have our, qualify our own journey and to figure it out together. And, but.
Well, and Russ brings up another interesting idea here. And yeah, it's the same Russ. He's one of our admins and is very instrumental in helping push Alfa Vedic, and we really appreciate you, Russ. So I'm giving you some time here, but because you're also brilliant in so many things you bring up. You said, so the idea that your negative emotions increase acidity or whatever. He says, if I'm more acidic, then I have more resistance in my frequency. Then is that the flow of vibration around me can't move as easily through me. Does that kind of make sense in those terms?
Well, if we want to get technically correct in the world of electricity and chemistry, acidic would be less resistance. It would be a centrifugal spiral versus centripetal. And in Chinese medicine, we'd say you're more prone to stagnation. It's like a pond that isn't moving properly. The energy isn't flowing robustly enough, and things get kind of stagnant and stuck and constipated. Higher resistance, what we call alkaline. If there's too much resistance, and you can be over alkaline, that's not good either. Then you're going to have a tendency for inflammation, premature aging, and deterioration of tissues. So you don't want to be on either side of the coin. You want to be neutral, and that's why living in between or outside, however you want to think of it, the world of polarities that we necessarily create in order to create the vibrations that allow us the simulation and the experience in the first place. We don't want to become those polarities, because you're going to be one side of the coin or the other, and either one's going to give us grief.
Yeah.
So
okay.
Yeah.
Great. We have one more slide here.
I say, okay, finish it up. And this, we're doing 2 seconds here.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, in the end, we're talking about balance, right? Finding that crucial balance, the yin and the yang, really to be in our bodies, in our higher self or whatever knows what that is. So don't overthink stuff, guys. Really go with your intuition and open up into your heart and just kind of go with your feelings more than anything, right? And that's a great kind of I guess test to know when you're going the right way. But these are what we're providing here today are a number of great tools to get there. So like taking the pH, so kind of what we provide these calcium powders to help you get there. It's just a tool. So go ahead, Bear.
Yeah, and the mental plane, what we think of as our mental processes, that is what puts the vibrations of the one force into motion in the first place. And then that necessarily, if you understand electricity, creates a polarization and the world of polarities. And that is exactly why we have been brought totally into the mental plane at present time. That's why when you need to qualify for medical school, as an example, you aren't judged by your ability to be a whole and balanced being. You are judged by your ability to regurgitate information on the mental plane. And our whole world right now is mental. And of course, when you have mental without that other side of ourselves, that other part of ourselves integrated in, then you have that polarity, and that polarity will keep polarizing to infinity. Polarities, it's like the polarities have polarities within themselves. And, in Oriental medicine, we call the yin within the yang and so forth. So in other words, you just have parts breaking off from parts. You're thinking in parts, you're losing the forest through the trees. And it's another way of saying I'm, totally schizophrenic. So we're in a mental schizophrenic state of mind these days. And anybody that goes back to the fulcrum of the power where all things emanate, you're open yourselves up to trolling pejoratives, where you're accused of having your head in the clouds or something. But in fact, it's real science. And the left-hand path, another way of terming the mental plane, is it's exactly what and I'm not getting in any religious inclinations here, but it's what Satanism is. And it's just, completely going down the path of materialism, with no mana, no prana, holding the whole thing together in the first place. And that's where you can surefire experience institutions in everything falling apart, all of our creations having no staying power, and also witnessing our bodies fall apart and fall prey to things we think of as disease and everything in the first place. So, it's about living and not about analyzing. And it's interesting, everything's right out in front, including the way they use words against us. When you look at just simple words like live, spelled Live, and you invert it, and that's what they've done with everything. They've inverted the truth and kept us down one side versus at the expense of the other. But you invert the word live and it spells evil. And everything's right in front of our face. So carbon-based simulation. Carbon, as we said, the backbone of the fifth octave. Carbon is the most robust element within our octave, as it represents the peak of the elemental wave form exactly 90 degrees perpendicular to its equator. So to understand that, just think you're out camping, you put up a simple tent with a vertical pole in the middle to keep the whole thing standing. Is that tent going to be more stable if the center supporting vertical pole is 90 degrees going straight up, perfect? Or is your tent going to be more stable if it's at 30 degrees at an angle from the ground? No, the tent's probably going to fall down in that case. And that's also why carbon derivatives, are so robust, and also, allow soil to hold moisture and to, be able to solubilize all the other minerals in the soil so that everything's more healthy, and plants are more healthy. It's also going to explain why that waveform represented by carbon is going to repolarize our cells. There's a technology out there called pulsed electromagnetic frequencies, because when people, and it works very well, because when people, are having a physical problem, if you measure the milliamperage of their cells, it starts falling below a certain level, below 70 milliamps. And then you, apply pulse electromagnetic frequencies. It repolarizes the cells, recharges them, just like putting fresh flash batteries into a flashlight. And, the cells pump up above 90 milliamps. And all of a sudden, all the other therapies you're doing work better, and the body starts getting some more wind back in the cells. Well, carbon is that same 90-degree repolarization effect, but on the pure waveform level. And in Asian medicine, second point down, would term the element carbon as absolute yang, synonymous with the position at sun at noonday. I said the energetics of the heart meridian. That's not technically correct within Asian medicine, because you've got other fire elements behind besides the heart meridian. But anyway, just take it. Absolute yang is carbon. It's 90 degrees perpendicular. It represents an absolute 100% repolarization of the cells. And most of us are operating on half-charge batteries these days. That means at the cellular level. That's why carbon 60, as an example, is really helpful. It's why electromagnetic devices like PEMF are also valuable in therapy. And carbon is the moisture regulator and governor of the soil, responsible for solubilizing and mineralizing the biotrain. Already said that. And so last thing, and then this will wrap it up. carbon 60, the real efficacy of this carbon variant. I believe it's a transitional state of carbon. Nobody's really gotten into this. I have my own ideas, but they're just my ideas. But anyway, it's a variant. It's a carbon variant. And the real efficacy of it lies in its capacity to repolarize biological cells, lending greater stability and resistance to stress while promoting regeneration and repair. And that's all, folks.
Haha. Yeah, carbon 60, we could do 1,000 Alfacasts on that alone. As Hope Light, she says that explains why C60 plumps up skin on your face, making wrinkles less apparent. I mean, who knows? But yeah, kind of delving into the transitional element aspect of C60 and taking it to the next level on that way is something we could always have a detailed conversation about. But I think overall, I think the takeaway for today is just understanding that minerals are extremely important in understanding that these transitional elements exist within these minerals, and how everything's always changing and shifting, and that inside we are too. And because we are pure consciousness and electrical in nature, in order for us to thrive with sending these all these all these informational fields through us, so that we can truly thrive and reduce aging, reduce disease, all that stuff, quote unquote disease. These are tools that we need and require currently in this density to really have extreme health. So this goes way beyond just taking a mineral supplement. This goes into understanding your own kind of internal milieu and what you currently can use for these tools. In terms of, like we talked about, the calcium powders with the pH strips. We have products that we offer that do that provide the transitional elements. You can get the Shilajit. You take charge of how you grow your food to make sure the minerals are really in your food. So one thing that someone had brought up multiple times on the Telegram and stuff was the idea of doing the aquaponics growing, and that's something I kind of stray away from because my concerns of the lack of minerals with that type of growing, right? But in the end, being that we are superconductors, these minerals are super important to maintain that optimum thriving state, if you will. Any final summary stuff
Mike.
from you? Yeah, any final summary stuff from you, Baron? We'll wrap this
summary up. Summary is support our permaculture farming project and educational products and buy our stuff.
Speaking of the permaculture thing, we've got a guild that we're involved with, and we're working locally here, and then we're going to build out our resources on the Telegram and on the website and Patreon especially. You can go to our Patreon, Patreon.com/Alfa Vedic, and that's a great way to support us as we develop the permaculture guild and stuff. And basically, my point is we're out doing this, and get involved locally, understand where your food's coming from, try to grow as much as your own food as you can. We know with talks with David Devine, which big shout out to David, by the way, he really helped us out. He shared our Alfacast with him on his channel, who has a lot of subscribers, and we've got a lot of people coming from him. And his big thing is about, of course, the changes in the sun, which all relates to as above, so below, as below, so above. The sun is in constant transition like these elements, and we're going through, if you take the wave of the sun, we're going through a down wave right now. So we're going into what they call a solar minimum, or with this cycle, a grand solar minimum. So we're going to have a lot less solar activity, which means less sun, which means longer winters, harsher weather. And then you take in the pole reversal concepts, and we have some hard times on this physicality coming, which is important for our spiritual evolution. This is all, we're all making this happen for a reason. If you want to check out that talk, you can check it out on Dave's channel. He broke it up into segments, or you can watch it on our channel. We go into a lot of these different practices, but this all relates together. This all comes together as above, so below. It's so crucial to understand the principle of correspondence. But, we relate this all to our health, and we all want to just we're all here to be we as consciousness are here to feel good and to enjoy the experience. Otherwise, what's the point? So that's what we want you to take away from this, is that these minerals are tools to help you and really thrive in this experience. And no matter what's thrown at us, with the knowledge in the end that we're trying to impart upon our community, we should be able to always thrive and have fun and enjoy the experience. Otherwise, what's the point? So hopefully,
Mike, one last question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, one last question. Do we have a guest next week, and who is it?
Oh yeah, good. Good point. We have a really fun, exciting guest. I think you'll really actually enjoy this talk today, because he goes by Troy Casey is his name. He's the certified health nut, ripped at 50, hashtag ripped at 50. This guy is just full of energy. He's really into a lot of the modalities here from that we talk about: the breath work, the qigong, diet, understanding that quote unquote diet isn't fixed into a specific polarity. It's always moving and kind of flowing with what you're into. The guy is ripped. He's over 50. He looks like he's 30. He's a badass, and I can't wait to have him on the show. I think we're going to go down a ton of really fun tangents. So Troy's next week. Please follow him, Certified Health Nut. He's got a ton of following. He's really well known in the alternative health circles and in the festival circuit and stuff. He's been on like RT lately, Russia Today. He's like, been on big stuff. So he's really going to be awesome to have on the show. And then another person that we'll be having on the next week is a survivalist, kind of primitive, not survivalist, but more of a primitive technology specialist from the UK, John, and his channel, blanking out right now, but we'll make sure to obviously get the word out and promote it. And you can join our, if you go to alfavedic.com, you can join our mailing list and get notifications of these upcoming guests. We also, on our Telegram group, which please join. It's a wonderful, fast-growing community now, t.me/Alfa Vedic. If you're into these talks and want to kind of really engage with the community, this is what we talk about all day long on Telegram. And we have, thanks to Russ, who we mentioned earlier, he put in some systems there now where you can see all of our guests and you can see links and stuff for them. So t.me/Alfa Vedic. But yeah, so we have two really interesting guests coming up this month. It's going to be a really fun show.
I've got a couple other lined up too. And then this Sunday, I'll be on Sherry Edwards' podcast. Soundworks anyway, she's the premier sound therapist on the entire planet. I learned a great deal from her back in the old days, and we have an interview with her on our venue, in our archive, but they'll be interviewing me on their show this Sunday. So a lot of good stuff happening for the new year. And,
and I really wanted to get into Wilhelm Reich a bit today, but we've run out of time. We should probably just do a whole Alfacast on him, and also I'd like to do one on Royal Reich. Those are two instrumental characters in history that actually showed what we're talking about today with specific modalities of healing, and were totally persecuted for it. And if you do a standard Google search for them, all you'll see is that continual persecution on the centralized technocrat-run information portal we call Google, which is just a total BS platform. But those two are fascinating characters, and we've been talking about on our Telegram group recently about Wilhelm Reich, and I know you're very familiar with him and stuff like the orgon and the organite and stuff. So we didn't really get a touch on it today. I was hoping we would, but this is such a deep topic that we're kind of over our 2-hour mark that we like to do before people get exhausted from the content. So that being said, let's plan on doing one of these on Wilhelm Reich, if that works for you, Bear.
That'd be fun.
Cool. Okay, guys. Hey, thanks so much for joining us today on the live chat. Thanks for the donations. You can join us on dlive.tv/Alfa Vedic. They actually have their own cryptocurrency called Lino Points that you can use to reward people for engaging. And as we increase this platform, we'll actually reward you guys for coming on. And those who engage the most, we have like a little treasure chest of Lino Points that we can reward people at the end of the show. I still need to kind of figure that out. Even as a crypto nerd, I haven't taken the time to totally delve into that. But as this grows, we'll start rewarding you with crypto for engaging with us on chats like this. So not only will you get the knowledge, but you can get some crypto. You can also go, we highly recommend using the Brave browser. It's a wonderful browser that's very security focused. And get off Google any way you can, and Apple. Like, just leave Safari, leave Chrome. Enough's enough. They have enough power. We need to start taking our power back. Brave is a great solution that allows you to not only have a more secure browsing experience, but also it's just faster. It uses less resources, and it also has a cryptocurrency attached to it called Basic Attention Token. And in this way, you can actually get rewarded for looking at ads in the Basic Attention Token, which is on the Ethereum blockchain. This is easily translated into Bitcoin or even US dollars or whatever fiat currency you use. So it's actually very practical. And you can go right to alfavedic.com and tip us Basic Attention Token as a way to thank us. And also, if you don't have the Brave browser, maybe Russ can drop it in the chat here, and we have it in our video show notes. But you can follow our link to get the browser, the Brave browser, and that will actually give us some Basic Attention Token. So if you don't have it yet, please follow our link to get it. And thanks again, guys. This will be on YouTube later today, as well as a podcast. Go to alfavedic.com for any more information. And everybody have a beautiful, wonderful, loving day. Cheers.